All right. So today is the day that we have set aside some time with two authors of the new book that's going to be on Amazon, just to get a little insight as to what they were planning, they were thinking when they came up with the first ever work from home security book. And so I'm going to lob the question over to you, Andrew. Tell me a little bit about the book and why write it now?
Sure, Shirley. Um, I think really it's, if you think about it at the moment, last year, something like 2,534 American government entities, healthcare organizations, and schools were the victims of ransomware attacks. And the average ransomware payout has swollen from about 112,000 in 2019 to 178,000 in the first half of 2020. So that's a massive increase. And another one I came across recently was a company called Norsk Hydro. A couple of months ago, they got hit by a ransomware attack, didn't want to pay the guys. And the CIO was saying on the BBC that so far it had cost him 45 million. I'll bet you neither of you have even heard of this attack. And I think the scary thing is this is going on all over the place, and it's just become so commonplace, even at this scale, we haven't even heard about it.
Yeah,
I would have thought something of that level, even though it was in the national news, I was barely aware of it. So on top of that, I think we've had the most radical transformation in the context of the approach to work since the Industrial Revolution. And this radical shift has created really a whole new world of opportunity for the cyber criminal. And so, as we come out of this world, there's going to be a whole load of decisions that people are going to have to make as to how am I going to fit into this new ecosystem? Decisions on the part of the employers and decisions on the part of the employees. A friend of mine, a very senior tech exec, refers to it as Judgment Day, which sounds gloriously sort of Terminator-like. But what he means by that is it's sort of decision time for everybody to decide, how am I going to work? What am I going to do? What am I going to offer my employees? And so at this point, lots of people are making decisions, and it seems a wonderful time to have a book where people who are trying to make decisions on this can refer to it, think about it, and decide, how am I going to set about it?
Right. And I know, Mark, you work a lot in the CX space. Give me your thoughts, opinions about the timing of the book. And it sounds like ransomware in conjunction with work at home really might be the perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've proven throughout this pandemic is that work from home is possible. I think that even the CX companies that I examine and analyze most of the time, if you look at some of those, even the biggest Teleperformance group, they had a few thousand people globally working from home, and that shot up to over 250,000 people working from home. So, we suddenly had to see, how do you get something like a contact center that generally has security on the perimeter? So, you protect that office environment, but then you put everybody in their own home. So suddenly you've got 250,000 different endpoints that can potentially be attacked and be a way into that organization. So, clearly there's like a social change, there's an industrial change, like Andrew was mentioning about the Industrial Revolution. The World Economic Forum has been talking about the fourth industrial revolution for about 5 years now, but now it seems that we've kind of gone over the edge and it's really happening. And so, yeah, I think that we are going to see the companies that were forced to do this, many of them will continue to do it. And that's because employees have found that they like it. And many of the companies have found that they can increase productivity. So it's a good thing for many companies. But I think that and what we will see is that very few go back completely to life in the office. We'll see a sort of hybrid as we move forward.
Yeah, you make a very good point. And Andrew, where do you see the spectrum of security as it relates to work at home? And I know I've read the book and you've got some great studies there and great stories. Give us just a few examples of what you've been seeing in the field as to how security is locking down work from home, so that, as Mark mentioned, it's going to be a hybrid scenario as we move forward and get out of the lockdowns.
Yeah. So I think absolutely, I think that's been a big question for people, is thinking through what does that look like? And there was a lot of sort of discussion and reflection in the early part of the year as to how it was going to look. And I think increasingly that's coming out at a sense that there will be a section of the employees who want to be permanent in the office, a section who want to be permanently at home, some who want to be home most of the time and come occasionally into the office, and some who want to be at home but come in for sort of 2 or 3 days a week into the office. So it's almost as though it splits 50-50, with 50% sort of in some section or other in the office and 50% sort of at home. And quite a lot of movement and dynamism. And I think that's going to be the big change from a security perspective, that you've got to actually manage both the dynamism and that capacity to facilitate being at home or being in the office. And I think also it's going to open up huge opportunities as bringing all sorts of new employees into the employment field. And therefore, how you manage your technology disbursement to widely diversified employees is going to be a real challenge. And so companies that are doing that well are going to be using technology methodologies which don't involve huge logistics operations, because that's going to be both economically and ecologically unsound.
Yeah, and to your point, when you and Mark first thought up this idea, this brainchild of having this book come out really right after the pandemic to look at the lessons learned, but also spring ahead, who are you writing this book for? Or, what would be the reason why someone would want to read this book?
Well, I'll jump in. I guess Andrew can probably also comment there as well.
Sure.
But I think that what we've really tried to address here is the basis of what supports work from home. I talked to Andrew about this while we were writing, and he came up with this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have the hierarchy and you think that, the first thing you need to get to be satisfied in life is food, water, shelter. And then you go up towards like self-actualization. This is a classic psychological study. And basically, work from home is very similar. It's much more than just sending people home with a laptop and sitting at their kitchen table. Clearly, you've got to address different types of management style, different types of onboarding, different training, different communications, managing people's mental health, because not everybody wants to be at home all the time. So you have to manage isolation as well. But really, you have all of those different factors of managing work from home, and security is kind of at the bottom. It's the foundation that kind of underpins everything else, because if you move into this kind of hybrid model and you don't have a secure environment, then you can forget about the reputation of your company.
Yeah, exactly. I think Mark's nailed it there. And I think what Mark brought particularly to the discussion was that whole concept of managing CX securely. I think one of the things we brought to the conversation was we have the benefit of working with, such a large proportion of the world's largest BPOs. And as Mark has already articulated, these guys are far ahead, actually, in terms of executing work at home well and making it work securely. And so we've had the benefit of hearing their stories, hearing their learnings, hearing how they've implemented things. And what we've tried to do is bring the benefit of the industry leaders, of their stories of how they've approached this thing into the book, so that people could benefit from them and apply them to their own situations. Because for these companies, secure CX work at home is their very lifeblood, because if it's not secure and it's not doing a good job of looking after the company, then that's the very essence of their business at risk.
And I thoroughly enjoyed a lot of the best practices, the stories, because that's how we all learn from others so that we can then perhaps sidestep what they had to go through and move it forward. But what was the favorite section of the book? Maybe Mark, you can lead. Is there anything that stepped out or was particularly interesting that you wanted to point out as your favorite part of the book?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a couple of sections. I think that where we focused on a shift towards bring your own device, and how obviously when you go to an office traditionally, the office, the environment is there, the equipment is there, but this is very different in a kind of distributed working model, and companies can quickly become massive logistical operations if they choose to be equipping people's homes as well. So managing people's own devices is particularly important and interesting, I think, and also just the road to normality as well. What we're going to see about the changes in the way that people work that become possible because of working from home. So, the increased flexibility, the change in communications and the way that people interact using video tools and things like Teams and Zoom, and just how that changes corporate culture. How do you manage corporate culture when this is something that traditionally managers have kind of introduced just by being there with people. So yeah, there's a lot of changes ahead.
Yeah, so I think, Shelley, apart from your own wonderful introduction, which is definitely part of my favorite piece of it, I think Mark's focus on the whole CX that he's brought really throughout the book has been fabulous. Mark runs a super series called the CX Files, which is a podcast that I'm very fond of and do a lot of listening to and have gleaned a lot from over the past months as I've caught up on past series. And I think that that perspective that Mark has brought to it has really has been a super piece all the way through the book. I think one of my other favorite pieces is a story we tell about the bridge of Choluteca at Honduras, which is a wonderful example of what has happened. And it's a very famous bridge which was connecting two communities over a large river in Honduras. And then the Hurricane Mitch blew in and took out both the sort of sides of the bridge, and actually was so powerful that it diverted the actual direction of the river. So that once the hurricane receded, you were left with this bridge that was known as the bridge to nowhere, because it went from nowhere to nowhere across nothing. And in many ways, it's a wonderful example of what could potentially happen to companies who don't think about this changed landscape they're in and make sure that things are properly connected. And I always love the whole sort of concept of strategy and thinking through strategy. And so for me, this is a glorious example of it. And sort of it reflects this changed environment and how you need to rethink through, and you can see companies starting to do this, to think through my people, my process, my technology, how I execute, how I interact with people, how I'm going to put things together. All of this now has to be rethought through. The best example of this for me was a chat with one of the world's biggest technology companies, a guy very senior at the top of it. And I was trying to persuade him he should be thinking about work at home. And he was blankly refusing to consider it. And now I saw him about sort of 6-7 months after COVID hit. And he'd already, that entire company had globally committed that 40% of their workforce would be work at home. And, if I named the company, all of us would know it immediately. And now one of their top priorities is structuring all their processes to be solid for work from home. So it's a real indication of how the whole world has changed.
Yeah, and you make a good point. When I was writing the foreword, and I had such a thrilling time working with both of you to make this book, just relatable to everyone. Because my workforce, we all work from home, and sometimes I don't meet the people face to face, but rather we're digital. You know, we're
Yeah.
in the ether. But I think you make a good point, Andrew, that the world has changed, and as some of these folks that are in leadership say what's next, I do think they need to look at their people, the process, like technology, as they move forward in a digital transformation journey. And security is right there in the middle of that to ensure that when you're on the journey, there's not a hiccup, to the point of what you mentioned at the top of the interview, which is, you know, bad things happen. There are bad actors everywhere, and to fortify the entire sphere is really what this book is all about. How do you do that? What are the best practices? How does it relate to CX? And then how does it make for a good experience, not only internally, but also externally as we move forward as a CX digital organization worldwide?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Well, guys, I'm thrilled that this is going to be on Amazon in a few days, and so it'll be I'm sure a bestseller. Is there any closing thoughts that you might have before we wrap up today?
Mark, do you want to?
Sure. I would just say that it's a really easy read. That it's got short chapters. And I think that what we've specifically done is dropped a lot of the jargon as well. So although when you normally read about things like network security, it's full of acronyms and jargon, you know, this is very much in a friendly, kind of easy to read style. So I think you know, it should be good for people who are generally interested in what work from home means, rather than, you know, very specifically security people.
Indeed. Yeah, no, and then I think the only other thing I would say, Shelley, is what we've also tried to introduce with a little section at the back of the book is some examples, some case studies of companies and what they've done and how they've approached it. So we've tried to make it practical, both in examples that we brought through the book, but also then at the end, so that it actually brings it to life. So it's not just what some things can be a sort of a theory as to what would be nice to do, but some examples and concrete examples of what people really have done, so that people can know that they're following in clear footsteps where someone has actually been before.
I think that's fantastic. And I did hear, not to be a tease, but that you're already working on your second edition. So I'm waiting to see what's next. So thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate the interview.
Very good.
Thanks.
Lovely to see you, Shelley.